Bridgetown Meadows was the kind of suburban neighborhood that inspired glossy real estate ads. Its wide, tree-lined streets, pristine lawns, and cookie-cutter homes formed a picturesque sight. Neighbors greeted each other courteously on morning jogs. Kids played hopscotch on the sidewalk, and the nightly glow from porch lights gave the cul-de-sacs a cozy feel. Yet beneath this well-ordered exterior lay the Bridgetown Meadows Homeowners Association, HOA, a powerful entity whose policies dictated everything from permissible paint colors to the dimensions of backyard sheds. Its guidelines were so detailed that many residents joked about needing a lawyer before planting a single rose bush. Nevertheless, most complied grudgingly, believing the HOA's rules preserved property values. However, what truly fueled tension in Bridgetown Meadows was not just the HOA's official policies, but the zeal of certain individuals who enforced them. Chief among these was Margaret Bennett, more commonly and derisively known as Karen, a middle-aged woman with impeccable posture and a rigidly styled bob haircut. She had appointed herself the neighborhood's aesthetic guardian and frequently overstepped her bounds. Little did anyone expect that Karen's fixation would soon escalate into mail tampering, an outrageous violation sparking an even bigger community upheaval. Karen had lived in Bridgetown Meadows for roughly 4 years. Almost immediately upon arrival, she ran for a seat on the HOA board. Though not elected board president, she was granted a role on the Neighborly Standards Committee, which she treated as her personal empire. Week after week, she delivered typed courtesy notices to residents who, in her view, violated some aesthetic principle. Whether it was a garden gnome she deemed tacky or a front yard flower bed not matching the recommended color palette, Karen documented every perceived infraction in a thick binder labeled neighborhood violations. She carried it around with the same pride a detective might have for a case file. Most people found her manner obnoxious, but tried to keep peace by removing the garden gnome, repainting a slightly chipped door, or following her dictates about holiday lights. Though many whispered behind her back, few dared confront her openly. She had a knack for citing obscure clauses from the HOA handbook, and no one wanted to risk fines or further escalation. The neighborhood learned to toe the line, hoping to avoid her next crusade. A few doors down from Karen's house lived Henry and Lucille Peterson, a gentle, elderly couple in their late 70s. They'd resided in Bridgetown Meadows for nearly 2 decades, well before Karen arrived. Originally from a bustling city, they moved here upon retirement, seeking a quiet environment. Their home was modest yet lovingly maintained, pale blue siding, white shutters, and a small front porch with a cushioned bench. Henry's health had begun to wane in recent years, some arthritis in the knees, occasional dizzy spells, while Lucille was spry but occasionally overwhelmed by household tasks. They had no children living nearby, so they often managed day-to-day chores at a slower pace. One such chore was collecting mail from the communal mailbox cluster at the end of the street. Sometimes, they left letters for a couple of days if they weren't feeling up to a walk. Little did they know that leaving mail uncollected would trigger Karen's most brazen act yet. Bridgetown Meadows did not have individual mailboxes at each driveway. Instead, it had several communal mailbox clusters, metal stand with locked boxes for each house, plus a larger slot for outgoing mail. Residents would walk to these clusters to retrieve their daily letters. The HOA mandated that no mailbox should appear untidy, meaning no flyers or unsolicited ads taped on the outside, and no stacks of uncollected envelopes sticking out. To Karen, the communal mail area was a prime location to observe neighbors' habits. She often took her daily walk precisely at mail delivery time, eyeing which boxes seemed too full or who had let junk mail accumulate. Even though each mailbox had a lock, small gaps sometimes showed if multiple letters or magazines piled up. Karen's disapproval toward the Petersons grew when she noticed, on several occasions, that their mailbox brimmed with letters, credit card offers, magazines, charitable solicitations. Twice she saw the mail carrier struggle to push new letters in. Rather than minding her own business, Karen decided this was a tacky eyesore. She convinced herself that any mailbox clutter detracted from the community's polished image. One Friday evening, Henry and Lucille returned from a short trip visiting an out-of-state nephew. They were tired, so they postponed their routine of collecting mail until the next morning. Karen, of course, noticed the bulging mailbox. She snapped photos as if documenting a crime scene. Later that night, Lucille found a handwritten note slipped under their front door. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, as a reminder from the Bridgetown Meadows HOA, all residents are expected to collect their mail in a timely manner. Overflowing mailboxes cause an unkempt appearance and present security risks. Kindly be more diligent. Sincerely, signed Karen, Neighborly Standards Committee. Henry, sleepy-eyed, reread the note. I didn't know there was a rule about collecting mail daily. Doesn't that seem excessive? Lucille shrugged, trying to keep the peace. They decided to be more mindful, though the note felt nosy and patronizing. They resolved to pick up their mail the next morning to avoid any fuss. But life has a way of derailing good intentions. The following week, Henry's arthritic flare-up made walking painful. Lucille, meanwhile, was busy driving him to a doctor's appointment and managing errands. A day or two passed, during which they neglected to collect the mail. By the time Lucille finally ambled down to the mailbox cluster, there was indeed a moderate stack, though not an outrageous one. Unfortunately for them, Karen was there, arms folded, tapping her foot. "Oh, Mrs. Peterson," she greeted with a tight smile. "I'm relieved to see you finally picking up your mail. It's been, 3 days now? You know that's not ideal, right? We have standards to uphold." Lucille flushed. "I'm sorry. My husband's been under the weather. We'll try to be quicker next time." Karen let out a sigh. "I'd hate for more official measures to be taken. We wouldn't want the HOA board stepping in." She paused, eyes narrowed. "This kind of thing lowers the neighborhood's appeal, you understand?" Feeling a sting of embarrassment, Lucille mumbled an apology. She carried her letters back home, heart pounding. It was mortifying to have a neighbor scold her like a misbehaving child. Worse, Henry, upon learning, felt guilty that his health was causing them trouble. Had the issue ended with Karen's scolding, the Petersons might have simply tried to comply more rigorously. But Karen's fervor escalated. Every time she passed the mailbox cluster, she checked for signs of mail accumulation, especially in box number 14, the Peterson slot. She even stuck her ear near it sometimes, shaking her head if she sensed a growing bundle. Why this fixated her so strongly was anyone's guess. Perhaps she found a new channel for her urge to micromanage. Perhaps she truly believed an overflowing mailbox was an aesthetic blight. In reality, the rest of the community hardly noticed. Most minded their own business, concerned with more pressing matters: work, kids, daily life. But for Karen, the Petersons' mailbox became a personal crusade. She typed complaint emails to the HOA board, citing unchecked accumulation of mail, leading to an eyesore and potential identity theft hazard. The board responded politely that residents should make an effort to collect mail, but they had no means to forcibly monitor it daily. Seeing no official support for her campaign, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands, a rash decision that would soon outrage the entire neighborhood. On a cloudy Wednesday evening, Karen walked to the mailbox cluster under the guise of depositing outgoing letters. She had noticed that the Petersons had not collected their mail since Monday afternoon, 2 days prior. She suspected a buildup inside box number 14. She felt it was tacky to let it accumulate, certain it tarnished the neighborhood's polished image. Standing alone, illuminated by a dim street lamp, Karen glanced around to ensure no one was watching. She withdrew a small ring of keys, duplicates she'd obtained for her own mailbox. She fidgeted with them, ignoring the fact that the Petersons' box lock was none of her business. Then, in a blatant breach of privacy, she tried to see if any key could fit the Petersons' lock. None did. Disappointed, but undeterred, she removed a small set of metal picks from her purse. She'd done some research on how to open mailbox locks, claiming to be a problem solver. Her heart pounded as she jiggled the lock. After several attempts, it clicked open. She felt a surge of adrenaline. Then, With an audacity that defied belief, Karen rummaged through the envelopes inside. Most were junk mail or bills, but a few items looked personal, handwritten return addresses. She sorted them, tossing out what she deemed garbage into the nearby public trash bin. She put the rest back, but not before skimming details. She locked the box and left, convinced she had improved the mailbox's appearance. In her twisted logic, she believed she was helping the Petersons and the community. Little did she realize the severity of the crime she'd just committed. Federal law prohibits tampering with another person's mail, punishable by hefty fines or even imprisonment. The next day, Henry felt a bit better and decided to pick up the mail. Lucille supported him on the short walk, just in case he grew dizzy. When they opened box number 14, they found fewer letters than usual for a 3-day span. Plus, some envelopes looked disturbed, half-bent or out of order. Alarm bells rang. Henry noticed a magazine subscription statement with a torn edge. An envelope from their insurance company was missing half the flap. Worse, 2 pieces of junk mail they expected to see were nowhere in sight. Confusion and worry set in. Back home, Henry laid out the letters on the kitchen table. "This is strange," he muttered, adjusting his reading glasses. "It's like someone went through them. Are we missing anything important?" Lucille, sifting through old records, realized a medical billing statement was missing. What on earth? We never throw those out. Why would it just vanish? Soon the truth dawned. "Someone opened our mailbox," Henry concluded. They recalled Karen's earlier lectures about overflow. Could she be so bold as to break in? Lucille felt uneasy. Even if it's Karen, that's a crime. Shaken, Henry called the HOA office to report suspicious tampering. The receptionist expressed concern and passed the complaint up the chain. Marissa Whitmore, the HOA board president, soon called them back. She was sympathetic, but explained the HOA had no direct authority over mail crimes. This was a federal offense under the jurisdiction of the postal inspector or local authorities. Marissa offered to forward an email to the entire neighborhood, reminding everyone that opening someone else's mailbox was illegal and urging vigilance. She also suggested the Petersons report the incident to the police. "But do you have any proof who did it?" she asked gently. They did not. All they had was suspicion that Karen might be involved. Nonetheless, Henry and Lucille, mortified and anxious, decided to call the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived, listened to their account, and said an official complaint could be filed. However, lacking direct evidence or camera footage, it might be challenging to identify the culprit. Henry sighed, wanting to avoid conflict but also determined to defend their privacy. It didn't take long for rumors to swirl around Bridgetown Meadows. The Petersons were well-liked, and the idea that someone had messed with their mail outraged many. Residents shared stories at the local coffee shop or while walking their dogs. Who would do such a thing? Karen, of course, kept a low profile. She disposed of the envelopes she considered useless and felt a mix of nerves and self-justification. She told herself she was helping to clean up the mailbox. Still, she sensed the potential backlash if discovered. She started avoiding the mailbox area when others were around, picking up her own mail late at night or early in the morning. Henry and Lucille found themselves at the center of sympathetic concern. Neighbors dropped by to express support. Some offered to help them pick up mail regularly if health issues flared up. The senior couple appreciated the kindness, but felt unsettled. Someone had invaded their privacy, stealing not just letters, but their sense of security. 2 days after the incident, Karen confided in a close friend, Sharon Lively, a fellow homeowner with whom Karen occasionally exchanged gossip. Over tea in Karen's immaculate living room, she tried to rationalize her actions. They let their mail pile up. "It looks sloppy," Karen insisted, stirring her cup. "I was merely clearing out the junk. If someone sees an overflowing box, they might think the owners are out of town and break in. I was preventing a bigger crime." Sharon's eyes widened. "But rummaging through their mail? That's crossing a line, Karen. You could face serious consequences." Karen dismissed the concern with a wave. "Don't be dramatic. The HOA guidelines say keep mailboxes tidy. I'm upholding the standard. The Petersons are old. Maybe they need help. I gave them help." Sharon didn't argue further, but left feeling uneasy. Karen's self-righteousness alarmed her. She worried Karen might do something equally reckless again. That weekend, Sharon felt compelled to speak up. She discreetly told Marissa Whitmore, the HOA president, about Karen's partial admission. She didn't explicitly say she picked the lock, but she implied she removed mail, Sharon confided. Marissa's face grew grim. Karen's meddling had always been borderline annoying, but this was a clear legal violation. Marissa weighed her options. If she confronted Karen directly, Karen might deny it or retaliate. The HOA's power was also limited in criminal matters. Still, Marissa knew she had to do something to protect the Petersons and restore faith in the community's integrity. She decided to quietly gather more information, urging neighbors to be on the lookout for suspicious behavior near the mailbox clusters. Meanwhile, the police investigation remained open, though it had little traction without solid proof. Henry and Lucille, once carefree about small routines like picking up mail, now felt anxious each time they approached the cluster. Lucille started going daily, even if Henry's health demanded that she juggle many tasks. She worried about what else might be stolen or tampered with. One afternoon, as Lucille bent to retrieve letters from the box, Karen strolled by. "Collecting mail more regularly, I see," Karen remarked with a tone of condescension. Lucille forced a polite nod, anger simmering beneath the surface. She suspected Karen was the culprit, but lacked direct proof. She hoped the police or HOA might handle it before something worse happened. That night, Lucille and Henry considered installing a personal mailbox camera. But the communal mailbox area was technically HOA property, and installing a camera could require board approval. The complexities weighed them down. "We never had trouble like this before," Henry lamented. "It's humiliating." Sensing the unrest, Marissa convened an emergency HOA meeting, inviting all residents. The main agenda: mail security and proper protocol. The gathering took place in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the entrance of Bridgetown Meadows. Chairs filled up quickly, curiosity and tension buzzing in the air. Marissa opened the meeting by explaining the situation. Mail tampering was suspected in the neighborhood, which was a serious matter. She didn't name names, but alluded to unlawful access of someone else's mailbox. She reminded everyone that the law prohibits such interference, and the HOA would fully cooperate with authorities if any evidence surfaced. Karen sat in the third row, arms folded, her eyes scanning the crowd. She noticed some people glaring at her. She maintained a stoic expression, inwardly fuming that the community had blown this out of proportion. She believed she was the one protecting neighborhood standards, not violating them. Then, Marissa suggested a constructive approach. "We're considering a volunteer system where neighbors can sign up to check each other's mail if someone is ill or out of town for a few days. This ensures no mailbox overflows and no one is tempted to meddle. We'd call it a mail buddy system." Applause erupted. Residents liked the idea of helping each other out, turning a fiasco into a chance for increased cooperation. Karen's face hardened. She recognized that her private intrusion was ironically leading to a friendly, community-driven solution, something that overshadowed her so-called enforcement. The HOA wasted no time organizing the new program. Within days, they circulated sign-up sheets, asking who might need or offer help collecting mail. The concept was simple. If you knew you'd be away or physically unable to walk to the mailbox daily, you'd pair with a volunteer neighbor. That neighbor would retrieve and hold your mail securely until you returned or felt better. Henry and Lucille, naturally, were among the first to join. Many neighbors offered to help them. Ultimately, they paired with a kindly retired teacher named Maureen Caldwell, who lived just down the street. Maureen promised to stop by the mailbox cluster every afternoon, retrieving not just her own letters, but any that the Petersons might miss. She'd slip them in a sealed envelope and deliver them to their doorstep. The mere existence of Mail Buddy undermined Karen's claim that she needed to break in for aesthetic or security reasons. There's a legitimate, lawful path to avoid overflowing mail, one that didn't involve rummaging through someone else's letters. Observing the swift success of the Mail Buddy system, Karen's anger boiled. She felt overshadowed. Her entire campaign to keep mailboxes tidy was now credited to the HOA's new volunteer program, rather than her own vigilant watch. In her mind, she had been a neighborhood savior, but no one thanked her. She complained to a few acquaintances that the mail buddy idea was an overreaction. If only people took personal responsibility, she sniffed, we wouldn't need such a system. We're enabling laziness. However, the broader community embraced the concept. Several older residents, single parents, and traveling professionals found relief in the arrangement. They no longer worried about letters piling up. Some neighbors even extended the buddy system to package deliveries, collecting parcels left on porches to prevent theft. Feeling marginalized, Karen retreated further into her self-righteous narrative. She refused to sign up for a mail buddy, instead ensuring she visited the cluster daily so no one would suspect her of hypocrisy. Meanwhile, the police investigation stalled due to lack of proof. But that didn't stop Marissa from taking an internal HOA measure. Based on Sharon Lively's testimony that Karen had admitted discarding the Petersons' junk mail, the HOA board decided to issue Karen an official written warning. They sent a letter. Dear Ms. Bennett, Karen, we have received credible information regarding potential interference with another resident's mail. While we understand your desire for a tidy community, tampering with mail is illegal and strictly prohibited. You are hereby warned that any future violation or confirmed evidence may result in further action, including involvement of law enforcement and possible fines as per HOA bylaws. We urge you to respect neighbors' privacy and adhere to the law. Sincerely, Marissa Whitmore, President, Bridgetown Meadows HOA. Karen read it with trembling hands. Outrage consumed her. In her eyes, the board had turned on her. She crumpled the letter, muttering curses about ingratitude. She vowed to find a way to reclaim her standing or prove she was right all along. One crisp fall morning, Lucille stepped outside to water her potted chrysanthemums. She spotted Karen marching up the driveway, a forced smile twisting her lips. Lucille's stomach dropped. She'd been avoiding Karen since the mail incident. Good morning, Karen began, voice clipped. I wanted to let you know there's an HOA rule about leaving hoses out after watering. They must be coiled up neatly. Otherwise, it's unsightly. Lucille blinked, baffled. I always roll it back up when I'm done, she said, pointing to the still-running hose in her hand. I've barely started watering. Karen pressed on. Just be mindful. We wouldn't want a violation notice. Also, I see you have a new inflatable decoration for Halloween. Is that pre-approved? Lucille frowned. It's a small pumpkin inflatable. The guidelines allow holiday decor for up to 3 weeks. We're well within that window. A charged silence followed. Then Lucille, trembling, mustered courage. While we're on the subject of rules, you had no right to open our mailbox. That's a federal offense. Karen's expression froze. I'm not admitting anything, Mrs. Peterson, she snapped. You let mail accumulate. I was just ensuring this neighborhood remained secure. Lucille stepped back, heart pounding. Kindly stay away from our mail. She turned, shutting the door. Inside, she felt shaken, yet also a measure of relief that she'd confronted Karen. Enough was enough. Despite Karen's hostility, the mail buddy system flourished. Neighbors reported heartwarming anecdotes. One single mother traveling for a business trip found her mailbox emptied and mail neatly bundled by a neighbor. A busy nurse working double shifts appreciated that her stack of bills never sat uncollected. The sense of communal support grew stronger each day. Henry and Lucille bonded with Maureen Caldwell, who checked their box like clockwork. Some afternoons, she'd knock on their door to say hello, sometimes bringing a homemade treat. I'm happy to help, Maureen insisted. We all need a hand now and then. This neighborly cooperation extended beyond mail, too. People began mowing each other's lawns when someone was ill, or dropping off soup for those under the weather. Ironically, the mail fiasco spurred an outpouring of kindness that overshadowed Karen's meddlesome negativity. Feeling cornered, Karen tried to rally a small faction of residents who disliked the mail buddy system. She argued that mail buddy fosters dependency, and we should maintain strict standards individually. A handful of folks, mostly echoing Karen's longtime gripes about sloppy neighbors, listened but didn't fully share her zeal. One evening, Karen hosted a small gathering in her living room. She served coffee and pastries, then launched into a tirade about the HOA board's lack of discipline and the coddling of seniors who couldn't pick up mail daily. She insisted the Petersons' mailbox fiasco had been blown out of proportion. Yet even among these grumblers, not all sympathized with her mail tampering. Some found it distasteful or outright criminal. By the end of the night, Karen sensed no strong alliance forming. She was increasingly isolated, overshadowed by the board's endorsement of communal compassion. As fall deepened, Henry's arthritis flared less frequently, and Lucille kept up with daily routines. Though still upset about the intrusion, they felt safer knowing Maureen had their back. Their mailbox never overflowed again. No further tampering incidents occurred. Tension lingered, but gradually eased. One afternoon, a police officer followed up on Henry's complaint, acknowledging they had no new leads. Henry politely thanked him and said they'd rely on the HOA's efforts and the new mail system for now. Privately, he felt justice was incomplete without punishing the culprit, but he didn't wish to push for more conflict. In small ways, the Petersons reclaimed their sense of normalcy. They hung a wreath on their door, continued their daily walks at their own pace, and shared warm conversations with neighbors who'd grown protective of them. They had no illusions about Karen's attitude, but chose not to let her overshadow their golden years. Halloween approached, and the neighborhood organized a trick-or-treat path for local children. Pumpkins, lights, and friendly ghost decorations appeared on porches. Even Henry and Lucille got into the spirit, placing a few adorable scarecrows by their front steps. Karen disdained excessive holiday decor, believing it could appear tacky, if not in strict moderation. She again distributed typed reminders about tasteful guidelines. People mostly ignored her. The HOA board had already clarified the permissible dates and scope for Halloween decorations. On Halloween night, kids scampered around in costumes, collecting candy. The Petersons, delighted, sat on their porch with a bowl of treats, greeting each little witch or superhero. They felt a renewed sense of belonging. Meanwhile, Karen's porch was dark, sporting only a single black lantern. She claimed it was understated elegance. No mention of male issues arose that evening, but the sense of who truly embraced community spirit and who stood apart had never felt clearer. Days after Halloween, a neighbor named Diane Mills discovered a half-open envelope on the ground near the mailbox cluster. It bore Lucille's name, with a partial return address from a local hospital. Alarmed, Diane picked it up. The seal was broken, and inside was a hospital notice referencing lab results. She delivered it to the Petersons, who recognized it as mail that should have been delivered days earlier. Had Karen meddled again? Or was it a simple postal mix-up? Henry suspected foul play, but they lacked proof. Regardless, the incident rekindled anger. This was personal information about Lucille's health. They wondered if Karen had rummaged and dropped it accidentally, or if the mail carrier had made an error. Diane, outraged, encouraged them to file another complaint. The Petersons hesitated. They had no direct evidence linking Karen, but the note's presence on the ground strongly suggested someone had removed it from the mailbox improperly. The atmosphere of suspicion thickened anew. A new HOA board meeting was called to address continued concerns about mail tampering. The rumor that another piece of the Petersons' mail went astray spread quickly. Residents demanded an official stance on how to protect privacy in the communal mail setup. Marissa Whitmore introduced proposals, including security cameras near mailbox clusters would require budget approval and privacy considerations, stricter locks, or updated mailbox designs, encouraging residents to fully use MailBuddy or install personal P.O. boxes if they wished. Most favored the camera idea, though it raised questions about cost and potential pushback from those wary of constant surveillance. Karen, ironically, spoke out against cameras, claiming they were invasive. She insisted that if people just took care of their mail daily, no cameras were needed. But the tide had turned. The majority realized that cameras might deter any unscrupulous rummaging. The board agreed to form a subcommittee to explore costs and guidelines for installing discrete security cameras. Karen fumed, seeing her arguments overshadowed by a fervor for actual enforcement methods. Desperate to regain a foothold, Karen composed an open letter titled, "Keep Bridgetown Meadows Private and Classy. No to Surveillance." She printed copies and taped them to the mailbox clusters. In it, she argued that cameras would create a police state feel, damaging property values and scaring off potential buyers. The next morning, neighbors found these flyers. Some read them, shrugged, and tossed them in the recycling bin. Others felt the language was melodramatic. The biggest irony was that Karen had proven more invasive than any camera. She was suspected of literally opening mail. Within hours, an HOA representative removed the flyers, citing them as unauthorized postings on community property. Karen's attempt to sway public opinion flopped spectacularly. Behind the scenes, Marissa reached out to the local U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Though typically busy with larger fraud or identity theft cases, they sometimes gave guidance on local mail tampering issues. She explained the suspicious events with the Petersons, the open letters, and the inability to produce conclusive proof. A postal inspector visited the community discreetly, talking to Henry and Lucille about the timeline. He acknowledged that if Karen were the culprit, she was indeed violating federal law. But lacking direct evidence or confession, prosecution remained unlikely. However, the inspector encouraged the HOA to press for secure mailbox upgrades and encourage immediate reporting of suspicious activity. Henry felt somewhat vindicated that a federal authority took them seriously, even if no arrest loomed. Meanwhile, Karen's name was in the postal inspector's notes, a faint but real threat hanging over her if she dared repeat her crime. Every cloud has a silver lining, as the old saying goes. The Petersons found themselves surrounded by more neighborly support than ever. Their mailbox rarely went more than a day without collection, thanks to Maureen. People dropped by with homemade desserts or just a chat, ensuring Henry and Lucille felt safe and included. This heightened sense of community extended well beyond the Petersons. Younger families offered to collect mail for traveling neighbors. Workaholics found help in stashing away packages so they wouldn't sit out for porch pirates. Bridgetown Meadows, ironically, grew more cohesive in direct response to Karen's overreach. Lucille and Henry felt a renewed sense of belonging. "We used to do everything ourselves," Henry told Maureen one day, sipping tea. "But we see now how neighbors can truly lift each other up. It's heartwarming, despite the circumstance." As Thanksgiving approached, the mail buddy system was put to the test. Many families traveled to visit relatives. In the past, some returned to overflowing mailboxes or soggy flyers. This time, volunteers stepped in seamlessly. The communal spirit soared. No mailbox was left stuffed, no package sat vulnerable. Karen, huddled in her home, watched the flurry of holiday comings and goings. She realized her old role as neighborhood watchdog was supplanted by genuine cooperation. She felt bitterness creeping in, though a small voice inside questioned if maybe she'd triggered a positive outcome. Could she dare take credit? Probably not. She sensed the others' disapproval looming around her like a storm cloud. On Thanksgiving Day, the Petersons invited Maureen over for pie. They laughed, shared stories, and marveled at how adversity had brought them a new friend. Meanwhile, Karen dined alone, having turned down invitations from a few acquaintances. She claimed she had important tasks to handle, though in truth, she felt unwelcome. Shortly after Thanksgiving, a final straw, another piece of the Petersons' mail was found torn and shoved into the outgoing mail slot, as if someone had rifled through it. Furious, Henry reported it to Marissa, who immediately demanded an emergency board session. Though again there was no direct proof, suspicion pointed to Karen. In that closed-door meeting, board members weighed whether to formally censure Karen. They had a trail of complaints, the partial admission to Sharon, and repeated suspicion from multiple neighbors. While they couldn't legally convict her, they could impose HOA sanctions, fines, or even push for her removal from the committee. It was a tricky step, but many felt they had to show zero tolerance. Ultimately, they voted to remove Karen from the Neighborly Standards Committee, effective immediately. They also threatened to fine her if any future mail tampering was reported. The HOA lawyer assured them this was within their bylaws, given credible evidence that she was at least partly responsible for the fiasco. The next day, Karen received a curt email from Marissa. Ms. Bennett, effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties on the Neighborly Standards Committee. The board has determined your recent actions conflict with the spirit and letter of our HOA guidelines. Any further unauthorized intrusion into neighbors' mail or property will result in fines and/or referral to law enforcement. Sincerely, Marissa Whitmore, HOA President. Karen felt her face heat with shame and indignation. She stared at the screen, knuckles whitening. She wanted to fight back, perhaps threaten legal action. Yet she knew the board had the power to remove her from committee roles. Her illusions of authority crumbled. In the following weeks, Karen became a pariah. The friends she'd once bossed around on the committee distanced themselves. Residents who used to greet her with cautious politeness now turned away, recalling her suspected lawbreaking. On nightly walks, she sent stares through windows, judging her. She refused to apologize publicly. Her pride wouldn't allow it, but she also couldn't lash out further without risking real legal trouble. So she withdrew, coming to the mailbox cluster at odd hours, giving curt nods if she encountered anyone. The removal from the committee severed her channel of official influence. She felt lost and resentful. Yet ironically, the neighborhood carried on smoothly, perhaps more smoothly than before. A peaceful winter settled over Bridgetown Meadows. Snow blanketed the lawns, holiday wreaths and lights glimmered in the evenings. The mail buddy system kept working flawlessly, preventing any seasonal backlog. Neighbors collectively breathed easier, no longer under the specter of Karen's prying eyes or official notices. Henry and Lucille, though still hurt by the mail intrusion, found themselves in good spirits. Their doctor visits went well, with Henry's arthritis mostly under control. Lucille baked cookies for the board as a thank you for handling the situation. They never received a direct apology from Karen, but they'd made their peace. They felt safe once more, trusting that the community had their back. Marissa and the board recognized how the fiasco had ironically galvanized the neighborhood. The mail buddy system was so successful, they considered expanding its scope to neighbor check-ins, ensuring seniors or those with mobility issues got help with groceries or yard work. A wave of volunteerism washed over Bridgetown Meadows, reminiscent of older times when neighbors truly knew and cared for each other. While some attributed the shift to the fiasco around the Petersons' mailbox, others said it was simply the kindness that existed all along, waiting to be awakened. Either way, the community had grown stronger, forging ties that no meddler could break. News of the mail buddy's success spread informally to other HOAs in the region. A local newspaper even ran a short feature about Bridgetown Meadows, turning a negative incident into a positive communal program. Residents beamed with pride. They recognized that suburban HOAs need not be purely about strict rules and fines. Genuine care and watchfulness for one another could flourish, given the right spark. Behind closed doors, Karen steamed at the coverage, feeling replaced as the neighborhood's guardian. But she was powerless to stop the new normal. Her meddling had, ironically, been the catalyst for a more cooperative environment. In a twisted sense, one might even say she achieved a better outcome for the neighborhood, though certainly not in the way she intended. One frosty morning, Karen stood by her kitchen window, staring at the mailbox cluster. She watched as Maureen cheerfully handed Lucille a neat bundle of envelopes. The two women laughed, then walked side by side back to their homes. Karen felt a pang of something akin to jealousy or remorse. Could she have approached the Petersons differently? Offered help rather than imposing her will? Pride wouldn't allow such introspection for long. She convinced herself she was the victim of an unfair smear. But deep in her gut, a tiny voice whispered that she had gone too far, crossing a moral and legal line. Regardless, there was no going back now. Time passed, and Bridgetown Meadows thrived. The Petersons lived out their days with renewed confidence, enjoying friendly chats on their porch, greeting each morning's mail without fear. Henry often joked, "We've never been so on top of our mail in our lives." The mail buddy system became a permanent fixture, lauded in HOA newsletters as an example of constructive neighborly action. Volunteers came and went, but the principle endured. No one's letters would be left to pile up, no mailbox overlooked. Karen, stripped of her committee post, faded into the background. She remained in the neighborhood, still clutching her old illusions of order, but rarely interfering publicly. The fiasco had tarnished her reputation, though, ironically, it had brightened the entire community's spirit. Thus, from the ashes of a petty, invasive act rose a more unified Bridgetown Meadows, where residents vowed to safeguard each other's rights, privacy, and well-being. The senior couple's humiliating ordeal ended up forging stronger mail security and a caring watch for everyone's deliveries. And so the story stands as proof. Even the worst intrusions can spark a silver lining if neighbors stand together to transform wrongdoing into renewed compassion.